Patel in 2017 wrote a really great article called The Origins, Potentials, and Limitations of Racial Justice. If you're able to get on and pull that article, highly recommend it. But in that article, they outline a few pitfalls, which I'll map over my own personal experience. One of them is that really the origins of what we know of as anti-racism and the sort of the teaching behind that specifically was really geared towards white folks. And it was a consciousness raising exercise for them, right? Because the idea was, and you can find this in W.E. Du Bois, right? Like people of color, Black folks specifically had this notion of double consciousness. They were already aware, right? So the education aspect really comes out of this idea of second wave feminism, consciousness raising, right? A way for us to educate the people. And by the people here, we're talking about white folk, about what's going on with racial justice. So a really good example of that is the white privilege walk, right? Where if you've done it before in an anti-racism training, everybody kind of starts at the same starting place, a series of questions from Peggy McIntosh's White Privilege Knapsack is red, right? And they go like this. If your parents had access to higher education, take a step forward. If you've ever had to worry about food for the next day, take a step forward, right? Or if you've never had to worry. So that the goal is to show sort of the distance, the privilege distance that exists, or gap, if you will, between white folks and people of color. The affective experience of that, if you've ever been a person of color in that space, is to feel like I'm like down in the dumps here. It's a really kind of defeatist experience. I'm biracial and I was stuck in the middle. I'm like, I'm not up there with those folks. I'm not back here with these folks. Like, it's a
Yeah.
really disorienting kind of experience. And that really the pedagogical aim of it is to create some dissonance for white folks, right? To make them realize the distance that exists between where they're situated and where people of color are. But that also creates the unexplored assumption that the goal for us then is togetherness, right? There's this built-in assumption, right? Particularly around the pedagogical aims of an activity like that, which is very common in anti-racism curriculum, to say individual sort of guilt, right? Sort of learning is really one of the key goals of anti-racism, right? That we need to understand better. And we hear that a lot in our narratives, be on the right side of history. It's this idea of learning and elevating your thinking to be anti-racist, right? And even becomes a label sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But we don't really in those things often talk about redistributions of power, right? Some of the like economic systems that create this, like the very kind of logical designs of race in the first place in terms of consolidation of both economic, political, and social power, right? Like we don't talk about that oftentimes in these instances. Rather, the goal is to prime our understanding around how we can be anti-racist. So that's, I think, one of the big pitfalls, or two of them perhaps, is that the emphasis is on individual learning and understanding and not on social transformation. And that the end goal in mind has to be this kind of harmonious relationship and not structures that promote justice and equality and fairness and those kind of ways, right? So social transformation. So I think that's like some of the dangers that I talk about when I think about, and this isn't just true to, I think, folks that really embrace the anti-racism pedagogy, but it's also about this idea of learning our way out of things, right? And we're not going to learn our way, understand our way out of racism. We're not
Mm.
going to allow for that. And so it really is going to require. So when you hear people talking about revolution and stuff like that, like these are not empty ideas, right? It actually requires a transformation of our social systems in order for us to achieve this thing. And that their personal relations are going to figure themselves out as a result, in my mind, right? We can't
Mm-hmm.
lead. I don't like everybody and I don't want to get along with everybody. But the idea that we can have space for those kind of differences and respect and power to be
Yeah.
able to truly negotiate our position, Like that's different now, right? It doesn't necessitate harmony necessarily. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, so we can't learn ourselves out of it. These sorts of exercises are often done with the assumption that harmony is the end goal for everyone involved. Also, I appreciate you speaking to the impact because the impact of that learning isn't distributed equally either. Even as you were
That's
describing your
right.
own experience, I've often heard that too. Feedback, folks of color. Wait a minute. Okay, y'all over here, y'all might have learned some things, but I'm feeling horrible over here. Where's my benefit off of this? What are my ways of getting something out of things that in a way, I'm being reminded of things that I already knew about my condition.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing
Can I just
that.
pull from there, Orlando?
Yeah,
Because
go
I
for it,
think
go for it.
that's this is exactly it. It's designed for white folks to learn something at somebody else's expense. And this isn't the first time that our racial justice projects have picked this up. I mentioned to you in the pre-conversation, I want
Yeah.
to blow up Brown versus Board versus Ed for a little bit, right? Board of Ed, Brown versus Board of Ed, right? In that idea, the case that was made for integration was on the ill effects of segregation for Black folks. So if you think about what was brought up as the most compelling evidence in the trial, Brown versus Board of Ed, was the Kenneth Clark doll test. Watched it. There's some great videos around it. Basically, they asked Black kids which baby dolls are good and which baby dolls are bad. And that most often the Black kids were saying the white baby dolls were good and the Black baby dolls were bad. And they used this, right? Black kids' awareness of social hierarchy, their educational awareness to make the case that Black kids were harmed, that they thought lesser of themselves because of segregation, and that integration then became the way to help solve this issue, right?
Mhm,
There was no mention of disparate resources, which was really the the vision of a lot of Black folks that were pushing for education reform was like, no, we like our schools. Our kids are learning great, but we actually need a school building. We need some money to pay our teachers, right? It was this cry for resources. And it got turned into this way for really where white folks retain the power of integration for white folks to help Black folks, right? So it became, again, this pedagogical impetus of, oh, we got to feel bad and then we need to do the right thing. The project that we've inherited has a long history here. And it's even come to the point where not only does it inform our anti-racist pedagogy or the way in which we teach folks to understand race in our country, but it's infected our public policy too. Now, this idea of multiculturalism and empathy building and all of this kind of stuff is so rife in schools when we're seeing these huge material inequities continue to plague them, right? So I draw that through line to say this caution, I think, is important for us to reckon with in our own individual origin stories, our own journeys, and our visions for the political project we want to be involved in. But it's also really something where we have to challenge and undo the legacy of in a lot of our systems as well.
are we internalizing negativity, or do we just understand the power structures as it's designed? And
Yeah.
is that understanding being seen as, "Oh, wait," and then for what end? Again, for what end does it serve? Okay. So as you
Yeah.
shared, we gotta feel
Why did
bad
not
about it.
not be yeah, this could be a symptom of your double consciousness. If we had taken it from a Du Boisian perspective, right? It's, oh, Black kids do that. They understand the system as an asset framing versus the way it got internalized because of a lot of that. And there's political reasons why that makes sense at the time of World War II or just post World War II. The US is trying to reconstitute itself as, right, post civil rights era as this progressive white led nation, right? Anti racism became appealing. So there's lots of reasons, but we need to understand those things as we think about our social justice origin stories, right? That these stories come out of histories and they push us towards destinations that we have to be really conscious of as we go about doing our work. And it requires, I think, a willingness for our politics and our analysis to change and shift over time. And yeah, I leave it at that for now.